sex education, first of all, entails a lot more than just explaining how sex happens or how a baby is made. So sexuality of the human body, human experience, is identity, orientation, and a host of other ways of being in the world. So the answer to when it is a good time to start talking about sex is as soon as your child is able to understand words. As soon as they are understanding that they are a separate person on the planet. So that's about like 2 years old, maybe 3. And some folks are like, whoa, no, 3 is too young to teach my kid about sex because that's just like inappropriate and you know, all these kind of things. But when we talk about teaching 3-year-olds about sexuality and sexual health, we're talking about teaching them about boundary setting and about things like empathy, consent, communication, healthy boundary setting. And all of these things can start to be discussed when a child is basically old enough to understand the words you're saying. And then as the years go on, when the child's 3 and 4 maybe, you can start moving into more conversations around consent and bodily autonomy, such as you might have heard the recent sort of move to not force children to hug their family members. The reason for this is as the kid gets older, preteen, teenager, adult, they've learned from an early age that they are in charge of their body and no one gets to decide who touches their body but them. Another way that sex education can start really early is naming body parts with a child. We all do that, like teach the kid where their eyes are and nose and ears, but a lot of time we don't talk about their genitals, and if we do, we use silly names or pet names or like hoo-hoo and ding-dong or whatever people say in their families. But the truth is, a child needs to know their body parts. So you need to get used to saying the word penis, get used to saying the word vulva, brush up on anatomy. For instance, the vulva's on the outside, the vagina's on the inside. And the reason for that is it's twofold. Essentially, when you're naming all the child's body parts, fingers, eyes, toes, and then you don't talk about their genitals in the real terms, you're sending a message of shame, of this part is dirty, we don't talk about this part, you can't talk to me about this part, and that sends the message again further that if something were to happen and someone were to touch them there, they don't have the words to explain what happened and they don't feel like they can come to you because you've already sent the message that you don't want to talk about that part. So over time, as it becomes age and developmentally appropriate, conversations evolve into more about gender roles, gender identity, sexual orientation, and then as puberty starts to become closer to happening, you want to start talking about like actual body changes, and that is around the age that most folks would probably introduce the sex talk, what people think of as the talk, talking about sexual intercourse and activities and how babies are made and how STIs are gotten or prevented. The most uncomfortable talk that parents feel like maybe is what they're dreading. This is kind of when it happens. So you can see that if you've started talking about using the words penis and vulva and vagina at 3 and 4 and 5 and talking about bodily autonomy and talking about boundaries and respecting your child's boundaries, that all of a sudden this dreaded talk becomes kind of easier to slide into. And a side note to that is the talk is not one afternoon. It is a set of maybe for like the duration of their puberty, touching base and checking in. A really good way to do that is to like watch TV with them and point out things in the media about gender roles, or if there's an ad about tampons that's overly feminine, you can talk about femininity versus masculinity and trans identities, and there's ways to introduce conversations around sexuality like all day, every day. But the thing to remember is even if your child appears to have shut down or she's not listening or they're not responding to you, they're listening, they're absorbing it. And the more often you have that awkward 20-minute talk where they're not talking, the sooner they're gonna come out of their shell and talk a little bit. Let's say your kid's 15 and you haven't yet. It's not too late. You haven't missed your chance. But you should still be starting small, talking a little bit every day. It shouldn't be no sex ed and all of a sudden you're gonna sit down and blow their minds with like how graphic you're gonna be and like you're gonna start using all these words you've never used before. Because that would be a little bit productive. They're going to gain some knowledge, but they're also going to be like really terrified and kind of shocked and maybe not feeling that comfortable to come to you with questions. So starting small, a little bit every day. It's not like 20 years ago, everybody's got the internet in their pocket. So the fact is, just straight up, your child will probably at some point see porn. They're going to find out about sex in some way, whether it's through school, and some schools don't have sex ed in their curricula. So it might not even be through school. So if it's not through school and it's not you, who's it going to be? So one question that I get a lot is around LGBTQ plus identities and parents navigating talking about those identities, and then a step further, when they feel their child might be gay or queer, or a child comes out to them as being LGBTQ plus, whatever that means for that child, and how the parents can navigate that conversation and that relationship. There's a lot of, my first advice would be, you're not alone. Don't think you're alone. Seek out support. And there are a lot of really great groups right here in Maine. So once your child comes out to you as LGBTQ plus, or even that they're just questioning, it can be a hard thing to hear, especially if it's not something that is necessarily visible in your family. So my first reaction to say is don't panic, don't freak out, because it's taken your kid a lot of guts to come talk to you. If you feel like maybe your child is queer plus and hasn't told you, and you're wondering why, and you don't know how to approach it, you should know that for them to talk to you is one of the hardest conversations they'll have, because as a parent, you're one of the most important people in their life. So the best thing you can do is make the space between you as open and caring as possible. You don't have to pretend to know everything. You don't have to pretend to get it. You don't even have to necessarily like it. All you have to do is support your child and love your child. Your kid is going through something that they probably barely even understand. Just being a teenager is hard, and then going through puberty is hard, and then possibly being queer is really hard. So they really need you now more than ever. Once the initial conversation, the hard coming out conversation happens, just ask your kid what they need of you. Just talk to them about what they need from you to feel safe and supported. And part of that conversation might be you advocating for them in a school setting or any other sort of community setting. One thing I want to say too, for everybody of any age talking to anybody about sex, it's okay to feel embarrassed. It's okay to feel awkward. It's okay to giggle. The best thing you can do is be as calm as possible. And the easiest way to do that is just to acknowledge, like, this might feel weird. It's kind of weird for me. It might be weird for you, but like, we can do this together. We can handle it. And allowing yourself to giggle and feel weird together. And kind of removing any expectations of what the conversation is supposed to look like. So essentially, whatever you're talking about, whatever they're telling you, it's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to need help. It's okay to have questions, but you need to do it in a not shaming way. And that goes from everything from shaming their body parts by not using their real words, not admitting that sex is pleasurable and it's pleasurable to have a body. Sex can be pleasure-centered, and it's all right to admit that something feels good. And the overarching no is don't shame. Don't bring shame into their life, because that is not only going to affect your relationship with them, they're going to carry that throughout their whole life, throughout their sex lives, their relationships, as they navigate the world as an adult. And that's not good for anybody.